There are many ways to die, but some are so savage, so inhuman, they echo through history. While some executions were quick and others painful, a few were crafted purely to terrify, designed to send a message carved in flesh and written in suffering. None were more horrifying than the blood eagle. But before we get there, let's take a closer look at the world of the Vikings. The Vikings lived in a world where honor wasn't just important, it meant survival. From 793 AD, when they raided Lindisfarne Monastery to their settlement stretching from Newfoundland to Constantinople, they built a reputation that still defines them today. But ships and swords only tell part of the story. Their society demanded absolute loyalty to family, to chieftains, to the gods. A Viking who broke oaths didn't just risk his life, but his chance at entering Valhalla. Their legal system, the Thing, dealt harsh punishments for specific crimes. Thieves faced mutilation, murderers paid wergild, blood money, but some offenses had no fixed penalty. Insulting a jarl's honor, betraying a blood brother, or killing a host who'd offered shelter, these demanded creative vengeance. That's where rituals like the Blood Eagle emerged. The sagas mention it only a handful of times, always for crimes cutting against the core of Viking values. Archaeology shows us how they lived. Longhouses with central hearths, tools for fishing and farming, chess pieces carved from walrus ivory. At first glance, it looks like any early medieval society. But their burial customs reveal darker truths. The Oseberg ship contained 2 women, one likely a queen, the other possibly a sacrificed slave. In Repton, England, a mass grave shows Viking warriors executed by blade and bludgeon. These weren't people who shied from brutality. Their religion fed this cycle of violence. Odin hung himself from Yggdrasil for wisdom. Thor killed giants with his hammer. The gods themselves were warriors, and the afterlife reflected this. Valhalla welcomed those who died, weapon in hand. He took the rest. Dying in bed meant weakness. Dying screaming under torture, that was worse than death, it was eternal shame. Consider the runestones scattered across Scandinavia. Many commemorate vengeance. The Rokestone tells of Theodoric, the Great's battles. The Glavendrup stone warns against disturbing its message. These weren't just memorials, they were threats carved in stone. When words failed, violence became the language everyone understood. Their expansion across Europe shows this culture in action. In 845, Ragnar Lothbrok supposedly sacked Paris and executed 111 Franks by hanging in a single day, one for each of his men killed. In Iceland, the sagas detail feuds lasting generations over stolen livestock or broken marriage pacts. Even their trade routes doubled as raiding circuits. Novgorod, Kiev, Baghdad, always with swords close at hand. This created a society where extreme punishments made grim sense. The Blood Eagle wasn't random cruelty, it balanced several purposes. It removed a threat publicly, it deterred future betrayals. Most importantly, it restored honor through a spectacle everyone would remember. In a world without writing, performances like this wrote laws in blood and pain that no one could ignore. The Blood Eagle represented more than just capital punishment. It served as the ultimate degradation in Viking society. Reserved for only the worst offenders, this execution method combined physical agony with spiritual obliteration. Historical accounts describe the victim being restrained face down, while the executioner carved their back open along the spine. Ribs were methodically severed from the vertebrae and pulled outward to create a grisly wing-like formation. The final act involved extracting the lungs through these wounds, draping them over the splayed ribs, while the captive still drew breath. But why choose such an elaborate method when simpler options exist? The answer lies in Norse cosmology. Eagles held sacred significance. Odin's hall Valhalla contained a golden eagle, and the giant Hrasvelg took eagle form to create winds with his wings. By transforming a man into this avian shape against his will, the execution mocked his humanity while denying him an honorable death. Worse still, Norse texts suggest screaming during the ordeal would bar entry to the afterlife, compounding the spiritual punishment. The method appears in just 3 major sources: the Orkneyinga saga, Norna Gests Tiat, and the Latin work Historia de Antiquitate Regum Norwegiensium. Each describes slightly different techniques, but all agree on key elements: the rib spreading, the lung removal, and the symbolic eagle imagery. Scholars debate whether these accounts reflect actual practice or later Christian exaggeration, but the consistency across geographically distant sources suggests some factual basis. This punishment targeted specific crimes: royal kinslayers, oath-breakers, and those who violated sacred hospitality laws. When Earl Torf Einar executed Halfdan Longleg using this method, it followed Halfdan's betrayal after being welcomed as a guest. The sagas emphasize how the blood eagle didn't just kill the body, it destroyed reputation and legacy. One account mentions salt being rubbed into the wounds, not just to increase pain but to prevent any honorable burial remnants. Medical experts note the procedure contained disturbing plausibility. Severing the costal cartilages where ribs meet the sternum would create the described wings without immediate fatality. The lung removal would cause death by suffocation or shock, but potentially not before minutes of conscious torment. Forensic pathologists point out that practiced executioners could complete key steps within 10 to 15 minutes on a restrained captive. The positioning held symbolic meaning too, face down in defeat rather than upright like a warrior. Some interpretations suggest the spread ribs mimicked ship's ribs, sending the condemned on a cursed final voyage, rather than joining the Einherjar in Valhalla's halls. Even the blood itself carried meaning, spilled outward in sacrifice rather than kept within the body, as in honorable battle deaths. Archaeology provides limited evidence, but the 10th century anthropomorphous stone from Gotland shows a figure with splayed ribs that may represent such an execution. Some scholars connect the practice to older Germanic traditions of dedicating enemies to Odin through gruesome sacrifices. The limited mentions in sources imply it remained rare, a punishment so extreme it entered legend precisely because few witnessed it. Next, we'll examine exactly how this horrifying process unfolded from first cut to final breath, and why silence during the ordeal mattered more than the pain itself. The step-by-step reality proves even more disturbing than the legend. The blood eagle began with restraint. The victim was forced prone, limbs secured as the executioner retrieved their tools, likely an axe or sea-axe knife for the initial cuts, along with possibly a hooked implement for the ribs. This positioning mattered. Face down prevented eye contact, reinforcing the victim's powerlessness. The first incision ran along the spine from neck to waist, splitting skin and muscle to expose vertebrae. Blood pooled beneath the victim as the cut deepened, but this was only preparation. Next came the rib separation. Starting at the lowest ribs, the executioner worked upwards, either cracking ribs from the spine with blunt force or cutting through cartilage with blades. Each rib made a distinctive sound when detached, a crack or wet slice depending on the method. Historical accounts suggest this process alone could take considerable time, with 11 rib pairs needing separation on each side. The victim remained conscious throughout, feeling each separation as internal structures shifted. Once the ribs were loosened, the executioner would grip them, pulling backward to create outward flaps resembling wings. This required significant force. Ribs naturally resist such movement while intact. Some interpretations suggest ropes may have been threaded through the ribs to aid spreading. Now came the signature moment: lung extraction. The executioner reached through the wounds, grasping lung tissue to pull sections through the openings. The lungs would expand slightly with each agonized breath, creating movement in the protruding tissue. Medical analysis shows this procedure could theoretically keep a victim alive for minutes. The lungs weren't immediately vital for circulation, though blood loss and shock would eventually cause death. Suffocation would occur as the lungs lost functionality, but not before the victim experienced the full horror of their transformation. Some accounts mention salt rubbed into the wounds, doubling both pain and symbolic meaning by preventing proper burial rites. Silence held terrifying importance. Norse beliefs suggested screams during death barred Valhalla's gates. The victim therefore faced an impossible choice: express agony and lose eternity, or endure mutilation stoically. Witnesses would watch for any sound, judging the victim's worthiness even as their body was unmade. This psychological torment often outweighed the physical pain. A warrior could handle pain, but the threat of eternal exclusion broke even the strong. The final moments served symbolic closure. With lungs exposed and ribs spread, the execution became a living tableau, a human transformed into a doomed bird, unable to fly. The fluttering lung tissue with each fading breath reinforced this imagery. Death likely came from blood loss, organ failure, or shock, but the exact moment mattered less than the prolonged spectacle beforehand. Archaeological evidence remains scarce. Bone rarely preserves such specific trauma. However, the careful methodology aligns with known Viking surgical skills. Their familiarity with animal butchery and battlefield medicine provided anatomical knowledge needed for such precise cruelty. The tools existed: axes, knives, and hooks common in Norse settlements could perform each step. This wasn't random brutality. Every element carried layered meanings. The eagle's sacred status mocked through forced transformation, the prolonged suffering mirroring the victim's crimes, the public spectacle ensuring no one would repeat their wrongdoing. Even the positioning held meaning. A warrior deserved to die upright with weapons in hand, while this face-down posture marked ultimate disgrace. When Earl Torf Einar performed this execution, witnesses remembered the details for generations. Precisely the point. Now consider who would merit such attention: not common criminals, but individuals whose actions struck at society's core. The next victims we'll examine weren't random targets, but men whose fates became legendary warnings. The Blood Eagle wasn't used on petty thieves or common murderers. It targeted only those whose crimes struck at the heart of Viking society, men whose punishments needed to echo through generations. Kings, oathbreakers, and betrayers of sacred hospitality laws faced this fate. Their executions served as public demonstrations that reinforced social order through unforgettable violence. These victims typically committed one of three unforgivable acts. The first was royal kinslaying, murdering blood relatives in power struggles. Viking succession often turned violent, but killing families violated foundational bonds. The second involved breaking sworn oaths to leaders, an act undermining the entire system of loyalty binding Norse society. The third, and perhaps most serious, was violating the laws of hospitality, where a guest turned on their host after accepting food and shelter. The victim's high status made their punishment meaningful. A fisherman executed brutally wouldn't command attention, but when rulers like Halfdan Longleg suffered the Blood Eagle, it reshaped political landscapes. The method didn't just erase enemies, it disgraced their memory while warning others. Contemporary accounts emphasize how these executions became legend precisely because they happened to figures people already knew. Surviving records identify specific victim types. The Orkneyinga saga mentions Norse earls using it against rebellious family members. Icelandic texts describe its use on kings who broke sworn treaties. Later, Christian chroniclers wrote of Viking leaders applying it to rival rulers. In each case, the victim held power before their fall, making their public unraveling more shocking. These punishments occurred at transitional moments in Viking society. When new leaders took power, they sometimes used the Blood Eagle to cement authority. During periods of external threat, it rallied communities against treachery. The sagas suggest these executions commonly followed military victories, where the defeated leader had committed particularly dishonorable acts. Archaeological evidence supports this selective targeting. Mass graves show ordinary executions using quick methods, decapitation or hanging. But high-status burial sites occasionally contain remains with unusual trauma that could match Blood Eagle descriptions. At Repton in England, one high-status Viking skeleton shows precise cuts along the vertebrae and rib damage consistent with ritual execution. The psychological impact extended beyond the victim. Witnessing a respected figure undergo this punishment reinforced social norms more effectively than laws could. It demonstrated the absolute worst consequences for violating community trust. The lasting fame of these executions, still discussed centuries later, proves their effectiveness as deterrents. Timing and location also mattered. These executions frequently occurred at symbolic sites, royal estates, gathering places, or battlefields where the crimes occurred. Some accounts mention them happening during major festivals, when crowds guarantee maximum exposure. The spectacle became part of the punishment, with audiences serving as both witnesses and participants in the condemnation. Next, we'll examine how two legendary victims met this fate. One, a Norse prince who underestimated his rival, the other, an English king who provoked the wrong family. Their stories reveal why names like Halfdan Longleg and King Aela became synonymous with the Blood Eagle's terrible legacy. Halfdan Longleg was no ordinary prisoner. He was a prince of Norway, son of King Harald Fairhair, and heir to one of the most powerful families in Viking Age Scandinavia. His position made his fate all the more shocking. The conflict began when Halfdan and his brother seized lands belonging to Rognvald Einar's father in the Orkney Islands. This wasn't just theft, it was a direct challenge to Torf, Einar's rule and honor. Torf Einar, ruler of the Orkneys, wasn't the type to let such an insult pass. He spent months plotting his revenge, gathering forces, while Halfdan remained unaware of the storm gathering against him. When Torf Einar finally struck, he captured Halfdan alone and defenseless, ensuring no allies could intervene. This isolation was deliberate. The execution needed to be a private spectacle between tormentor and victim before becoming public legend. The choice of execution method carried deep meaning. The Blood Eagle wasn't just about killing, it transformed punishment into religious theater. Today, some scholars debate whether the actual Blood Eagle occurred or if Christian chroniclers exaggerated Norse brutality centuries later. Regardless, the story of how Torf Einar carefully sliced Halfdan's back, severed ribs from spine, pulled lungs outward like wings, these details endure in the sagas. Consider the timing. Viking executions often coincided with religious festivals or political transitions. Halfdan's death likely occurred during such an occasion, witnessed by key figures whose loyalty Torf Einar needed to secure. The act served multiple purposes: personal vengeance, political warning, and spiritual offering rolled into one brutal performance. Norse society operated on visible displays of power. This execution assured no one would question Torf Einar's authority again. The religious dimensions heightened the horror. Some sources suggest Torf Einar dedicated Halfdan's suffering to Odin, twisting an execution into sacrifice. Imagine the scene, not just a dying man, but a prince becoming unwilling offering to the gods. Odin himself had hung from Yggdrasil for wisdom. Now Halfdan hung between life and death, in grotesque imitation. Every cut carried symbolic weight beyond physical pain. Halfdan's high status magnified the punishment's impact. His birthright should have guaranteed honorable warfare or quick death, if captured. Instead, he became an example of what happened when even royalty broke sacred rules. The sagas preserve his story precisely because it violated expectations. A prince reduced to screaming sacrifice instead of singing in Valhalla. Archaeology hints at similar high-status executions. At Repton in England, archaeologists found a mass grave of executed Vikings where one skeleton shows signs of systematic back-cutting. While we can't confirm this was Halfdan, such finds prove the Norse capability for methodical executions that match saga descriptions. This story echoes through later Viking history. When Ragnar Lothbrok's sons faced King Aela of Northumbria decades later, they knew exactly what execution method would carry maximum symbolic weight. The pattern remained consistent across generations. Treachery demanded responses that blended personal revenge with political theatre. Now consider the next chapter in this brutal tradition, where an English king would discover the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok remembered their father's murder all too well. Their revenge would make Torf Einar's actions seem almost restrained by comparison. If you're finding this breakdown shocking, wait until you hear about King Aela and the revenge of Ragnar's son. But before we continue, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay updated on history's most disturbing secrets. King Aela of Northumbria made a fatal mistake when he threw Ragnar Lothbrok into a snake pit. He thought it would end his Viking troubles, but it ignited a nightmare. As the snakes coiled around Ragnar, he prophesied, "The little pigs will grunt when they hear how the old boar suffered." His sons, Ivar, the Boneless, Ubba, and Halfdan, turned that grief into vengeance, launching one of the Viking Age's most devastating campaigns. The Great Heathen Army that arrived in 865 was no mere raid. Thousands strong, it systematically dismantled Northumbria's defenses. York fell, and soon Aela himself was captured. Rather than a swift execution, they performed the Blood Eagle, a ritualistic, agonizing death designed as revenge and a warning. Chronicles describe Ivar personally supervising the execution, ensuring each step followed tradition. Historians still debate whether Aella actually suffered the blood eagle, or if Christian chroniclers exaggerated Viking cruelty. But archaeological finds at Repton show the Great Heathen Army practiced ritualistic violence. Regardless, the story endures because it reshaped England. After Aella's death, the Vikings established the Danelaw, leaving lasting cultural marks. Ragnar's sons didn't just kill a king, they crafted a terrifying legend that still chills us today. The Blood Eagle sits between history and legend, sparking fierce debate among scholars. 9 medieval sources describe the ritual, yet none come from eyewitnesses. These accounts, often penned by Christian scribes centuries after the Viking Age, may exaggerate Norse cruelty. Most details come from sagas retelling events long after they happened, like trying to piece together a crime from hearsay. Medical experts agree it's theoretically possible. Viking warriors, skilled with blades and anatomy from hunting and battle, could separate ribs and extract lungs, leaving victims conscious for minutes before succumbing to blood loss. However, no archaeological evidence confirms anyone survived the initial cuts. Some scholars think the ritual was metaphorical, perhaps describing eagle-shaped carvings on victims, rather than literal rib spreading. Viking poetry often used animal symbolism, so carving the blood eagle could mean exposing a corpse to scavengers. Still, the consistency across multiple sagas and chronicles makes pure invention unlikely. Psychologically, even rumors of such cruelty were effective intimidation. The idea of the blood eagle might have been enough to terrify enemies. Whether real or imagined, it showcased the Vikings' mastery of reputation-based warfare. Ultimately, the blood eagle remains a grim mystery, a legend so detailed it feels real, yet so shocking we hope it was just a story. The blood eagle has become a popular feature in modern storytelling, appearing in films, television shows, and video games. The History Channel's Vikings delivered a graphic portrayal of Jarl Borg's execution, highlighting the ritual's blend of physical agony and psychological terror. The showrunners consulted historians to capture its essence, compressing the timeline for dramatic effect. Borg's final scream became one of the show's most talked about moments. Video games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla let players perform the ritual, with developers researching Norse texts for authenticity, though they amplified the gore for effect. Other games, including Crusader Kings III and Mount & Blade, Viking Conquest, reference it through event text, cementing its reputation as a symbol of Viking cruelty. The Blood Eagle's shock factor makes it instantly recognizable compared to other executions. It's appeared in shows like Supernatural and American Gods to showcase the mercilessness of ancient gods, and even in comedies like Norseman for dark humor. Metal bands like Amon Amarth embrace the ritual's symbolism, reflecting its fusion of planning and violence. This fascination reveals our morbid curiosity and complex relationship with humanity's violent past. The Blood Eagle, now a pop culture staple, embodies the Vikings' savage legacy and our own fascination with the extremes of human cruelty. The Blood Eagle forces us to confront humanity's capacity for cruelty. Whether historical fact or embellished legend, what matters is that Viking society embraced this story, believed it possible enough to shape behavior for generations. Which revelation struck you as most disturbing? Share your thoughts below. We read every comment. For more untold stories from history's darkest chapters, keep exploring our videos.